Welcome to Buzz Breakdown, bringing you the most important insights from today's top stories. I'm Robert Price.
And I'm Samantha Peterson.
Today, we're diving deep into the devastating wildfires that recently swept through Los Angeles.
Absolutely, Robert. And we've got some pretty heavy-hitting sources to help us break this all down. Articles from PBS News and AP News, and we're also pulling in some live updates from CBS News.
And the scope of this disaster, Samantha, is just unbelievable.
It's truly heartbreaking. 24 lives lost.
Over 12,000 structures just gone.
And tens of thousands of people displaced. I mean, it's just...
So we're here to kind of figure out what exactly happened, right? What sparked these fires, and why did they spread so quickly and cause so much damage?
That's the big question. And a good place to start, Robert, might be with the Palisades fire.
The largest and the deadliest, yeah.
Exactly. Officials have actually narrowed down the origin point to a specific location, like a spot behind a house. And this is where it gets interesting, because figuring out the cause of a wildfire is like, well...
It's a whole investigation.
It is. It's like detective work, but with, flames.
Instead of fingerprints.
Yeah. They have to look at everything. Lightning, utility lines, could be arson, debris burning, even accidents. You wouldn't believe how often something as small as, like, a cigarette butt can start a massive wildfire.
Especially in those dry, windy conditions, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, in this case, they were able to rule out lightning pretty quickly.
No thunderstorm.
None when the fire broke out. But they were looking into the possibility of downed power lines, which happens pretty often with wildfires. But Southern California Edison, they filed a report, actually, with the California Public Utilities Commission saying that their lines in the area, there were no issues, nothing until after the Eaton fire started.
So that's a pretty important detail.
It is. So now we're left with, well, arson is still on the table, but nothing's been officially confirmed. And of course, accidents, you never know.
It's like that gender reveal party that caused a wildfire back in 2021.
Oh, yeah. That was a big one. Goes to show, sometimes even things that seem harmless, well...
Can have some pretty devastating consequences.
Especially in dry conditions. And speaking of dry conditions, Robert, the sources really emphasize how dry everything was, and then you add in the Santa Ana winds. It's like the perfect recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and CBS News, they had some firsthand accounts, people describing, like, a whole mountainside just engulfed in flames. Wind pushing those flames like 50 feet into the air.
That's terrifying.
And what's even worse, there was no rain in the forecast. So those fires, they were just going to keep burning until they ran out of fuel or the weather just...
It's changed drastically. Yeah, it was a bleak outlook.
This whole thing has really sparked a lot of debate, a lot of finger pointing, especially when it comes to who's responsible for preventing these kinds of disasters.
Yeah, and I mean, right away you had President-elect Trump criticizing California's forest management practices.
And then, of course, you had Governor Newsom firing back, basically blaming climate change.
Right, and it's this whole ongoing debate about forest management. Like, is it really the key to preventing these wildfires?
And PBS News actually did a pretty deep dive into this whole issue, and it's not a simple answer.
It's not. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, we just need to manage our forests better, but it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, there are so many factors to consider. What kind of trees are there?
Yeah.
The terrain. What's the history of fire suppression been like in that specific area? It's like this whole web of interconnected things.
It is. And what's interesting is that in a lot of cases, decades of suppressing fires, it's actually made things worse.
How so?
Well, think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to clean your living room, right? But instead of throwing out old magazines, you just keep stacking them up.
Eventually, you're going to have a fire hazard.
Exactly. And that's kind of what's happened in a lot of forests. All those years of putting out every little fire, it's led to this buildup of dead trees, dry brush, all this fuel just waiting to ignite.
So then when a fire does start, it burns hotter, spreads faster.
Exactly. It's like it has all this extra fuel to feed on.
So fire suppression is important, but it sounds like we need a more balanced approach, right?
Right.
One that recognizes that fire is actually a natural part of these ecosystems.
Absolutely. It's like you need to clean your house, but you don't want to live in a sterile environment. You need a little bit of, controlled chaos.
Right, a little bit of messiness.
Yeah, you don't want to create a fire hazard, but you also don't want to completely eliminate something that's natural and necessary. And another thing to think about here is the increasing number of people living in these, what they call wildland-urban interface areas.
Which is basically where homes are built right up against areas that are prone to wildfires.
Right, and it's a huge concern because these homes, they essentially become part of the fuel for the fire.
Like adding kindling to the fire.
Exactly, and it puts so much strain on firefighting resources. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
So what can we do to reduce the risk in these areas?
Well, one thing is creating what they call defensible space around homes.
So, like clearing out the brush.
Yeah, clearing out the brush, trimming trees, using fire-resistant building materials, anything you can do to create a buffer zone between your home and the surrounding vegetation.
Kind of like building a moat around your castle.
Exactly.
It's interesting. We've been talking a lot about the immediate damage of these fires, but the sources also really highlight the long-term consequences. And it's not just about rebuilding homes.
Right. It's about the impact on communities, the environment, the economy. And of course, we can't talk about this without mentioning climate change.
It's kind of the elephant in the room.
It is. I mean, we're seeing drier conditions, longer fire seasons, these extreme weather events like the Santa Ana winds.
And it's not just a California problem, right?
Nope. This is a global issue.
Yeah.
And as our planet keeps warming, we can expect to see more and more of these extreme fire events.
So what do we do? How do we adapt and prepare for this new reality?
I think it starts with acknowledging that climate change is real and it's impacting wildfire risk in a big way. For a long time, the focus has been on fire suppression, putting out every fire as quickly as possible.
But that's clearly not sustainable.
No, we need a more holistic approach. We need to recognize that fire is a natural part of these ecosystems and that fire suppression alone isn't the answer. It's like trying to hold back the tide with a broom.
You're going to need a bigger broom or maybe a seawall.
Exactly.
Speaking of rebuilding, the recovery effort in Los Angeles is going to be massive. I mean, thousands of homes and businesses destroyed.
And the emotional toll is unimaginable. It's really inspiring to see organizations like World Central Kitchen and the Red Cross stepping up.
Providing meals, shelter, all those essential services.
Yeah, it's incredible. But the recovery goes beyond just meeting those immediate needs. It's about rebuilding homes, businesses, helping communities recover economically.
It's about rebuilding lives.
And that can take years.
And it's not just the physical rebuilding, right? There's the emotional trauma, the psychological impact of going through something like this.
Absolutely. These fires, they forced people to confront their own mortality. They've seen their homes, their communities destroyed. They've lost loved ones, pets, precious belongings.
It's a level of trauma that can have a lasting impact.
It can. And it highlights the need for mental health support in the aftermath of these disasters. We need to make sure there are resources available for people who are struggling to cope.
Therapists, counselors, support groups.
Yeah, anything that can provide a safe space for people to process their experiences and start to heal.
One thing that really stood out to me in the sources was the story of Jenna Cooper.
Oh, the real estate agent.
Yeah, she turned her store into a clothing donation center.
That's amazing.
And she even got celebrities involved, like Sharon Stone and Halle Berry.
Wow.
Donating items, raising awareness.
Yeah.
It's just incredible how people from all walks of life came together to help.
It is. It's a reminder that even in the midst of all this devastation, there's still so much good in the world.
There is. And that community support, that human connection, it's so important in times like these. We've covered a lot of ground here, but I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that wildfires are complex.
They are.
And there's no easy solution. We can't just point fingers and blame one thing or another. We need to be thinking about this holistically.
I agree.
We need to be considering the impact on the environment, the economy, the social fabric of these communities, and we need to be proactive, not reactive. The more we can prepare for these events, the better off we'll be.
Absolutely. And that preparedness needs to happen at every level, from individual homeowners to entire communities to the government. We all have a role to play in protecting ourselves and each other from the threat of wildfires.
And I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah, I agree.
We've explored the immediate devastation of these Los Angeles wildfires, but we've also looked at the broader context, the long-term implications, and the critical need for preparedness.
And I think it's important to remember that even in the face of tragedy, there's hope, there's resilience, and there's the incredible power of community.
So, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of a complex and important topic.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? The immediate impact of these fires, the long-term consequences, but there's something else we need to talk about.
What's that?
The human side of this tragedy. I mean, the numbers are important, sure, but...
It's the individual stories that really hit home.
Exactly. And our sources, they're full of these stories. Families who had to evacuate so quickly barely had time to grab anything. People losing everything they've worked for their whole lives.
And those firefighters, risking their own lives to protect others. Unbelievable.
It is. But, amidst all the destruction, there's also these incredible stories of like community support, just people coming together to help each other.
Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers lending a hand.
It's really inspiring, isn't it? Shows the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the darkest of times, there's always that compassion.
And one story that really stood out to me, I think it's from CBS, was that real estate agent
Jenna Cooper, yeah.
turned her store into a clothing donation center.
And got all those celebrities involved. I mean, Sharon Stone, Halle Berry.
Incredible. It's just amazing how people from all walks of life stepped up to help.
It really is. And World Central Kitchen, too, providing thousands of meals to evacuees and first responders.
They do such amazing work.
They do. These stories, they're a good reminder that even in the face of so much loss, there's still good in the world.
Absolutely. There's kindness, there's generosity, there's that sense of community.
Yeah. Helps us heal, helps us rebuild.
It's important to remember that, right?
Mm.
Amidst all the statistics and the political debates, we can't forget about the people, the individuals whose lives have been turned upside down.
Exactly. People who lost loved ones, lost their homes, lost their sense of security.
And we need to remember that. We need to offer our support, our compassion.
We do.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to just acknowledge the immense human cost of these fires.
Yeah, absolutely. Our thoughts are with everyone who's been affected by this tragedy.
And remember what we've learned. Preparedness, resilience, community.
Those are the key takeaways.
Yeah, because we're probably going to be facing more of these events in the future. We can learn from these fires, apply those lessons, and work towards a more sustainable future.
That's the goal. And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this episode of Buzz Breakdown. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the stories that matter.